Critical thinking. What is it and why is it important? Critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action, according to the foundation for critical thinking. All right, critical thinking. How about we come up with an easier definition? We can also think of critical thinking as reasonable reflective thinking that is focused on deciding what to believe or what to do. This is according to B. Brainfit. It's also known as distilling it even further. Critical thinking is deciding what's true and what you should do. So with everything, we should always ask ourselves the so what question. Why is this important? Why do we need to know this? The bigger picture is thinking critically, among other things, helps us fight our cognitive biases. Those are things that make us prone to irrationality, distortion, and prejudices. So as we delve deeper into this idea of critical thinking, let's think about some things like what are some of the skills required to think in a critical manner? Critical thinking requires people to be able to refine the following skills. First off, identification of key problems or issues. You have to be able to identify what the issue is. Then, one must be able to conduct research in order to properly distill facts and figures. Not to be forgotten are equally important skills such as being able to identify biases, both in yourself and all sides of the argument or question you're considering, making inferences from the information that you've collected or researched, and making conclusions from that data and from your inferences. And finally, just a couple more skills for us to think about when we're talking about critical thinking. One of the keys to thinking critically is also determining relevance of the information in front of you. Ask yourself, why is this important to the task at hand? And one last thing, this is very important, curiosity. We must always be curious as to what is going on around us. So still on the topic of critical thinking, let's ask ourselves a question. What is one of the biggest sources of information in the here and now? Well, if you answered the internet, you're right. Let's think about this. Each minute, which is 60 seconds, there are 60,000 images uploaded to the social media platform Instagram. In that same minute, there are 4.7 million videos viewed on YouTube. Still on the topic of the internet and critical thinking, NodeGraph also tells us that in those same 60 seconds, that same minute, there are 2 million emails sent. In addition, and this is interesting here, there are 4.2 million Google searches conducted. Now, I don't know about you, but it certainly is hard to fathom the sheer volume of information that's being processed. So let's talk about the human brain and its need to be a central processing unit. So critical thinking and information processing. The data we just viewed reinforces the need for the skills to process all the information that we are constantly being bombarded with daily and up to the minute. It is up to us to be the gatekeeper of that information, and we need to have the proper critical thinking skills to do so. Next, we're going to take a quick look at some real-world examples of why critical thinking is important. So the image that you're seeing on the screen at the right-hand side was shown to a group of high school students during a study, a Stanford University study, with a simple caption reading, Fukushima Nuclear Flowers. According to this same study, more than 80% of the high school students accepted the caption that these were mutated flowers from the Fukushima nuclear reactor in Japan. The photo had no attribution, it simply had a caption that reported the flowers as being from Japan. So here's where our critical thinking skills would have come to the rescue in this situation. So if the students had utilized reasoned skepticism, curiosity, and just a little bit of research, they would have been able to realize that the flower story itself was completely fabricated and the picture itself was just a random image from the internet. More on that same study, and filing this under wow, this really happened. As part of that same Stanford study, researchers found that most Stanford students could not identify the difference between a mainstream source and a fringe source online. Students in the study were given 2 sources and allowed time to research the background on each source. All right, so what the research would have told them, if they had conducted research, even with the time to conduct that research, most students were unable to tell the difference between the 2 medical organizations in question. One of these medical organizations has been around since the 1930s and is very well respected. The other one supports racism and has been classified as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Some more interesting information from this study. So what else does the Stanford study tell us? The same Stanford education study tells us that middle school through college students have difficulty identifying bias in all of its forms. Bias is defined as any opinion that influences a person's thoughts, feelings, or actions. Still on the topic of bias, recall that most writing will have some sort of bias built in. That's just human nature. It is up to us as reasonably educated individuals utilizing critical thinking skills in order to understand an author's bias. Once we understand the author's viewpoint, we're closer to our goal of thinking critically about the text. Here's some important clues to understanding an author's bias, and also why is this important. Reading through a critical thinking lens has us looking for keys in the author's word choice to help us understand their bias. Keep in mind that every author will have some sort of bias, and identifying that bias is an important step in helping us ascertain the validity of the information. Continuing with the topic of identifying bias, there's more things to look for. Some quick tips. You're going to be looking for author's diction and tone and use of evidence are the primary factors we'll be examining. As far as diction and tone, the author's specific word choice and attitude towards a subject are clues we need to unpack when reading. Bias and the critical thinking lens. So we're going to put on our critical thinking glasses again. And we also want to look for other clues, such as the use of positive and negative evidence in the text, and positive and negative connotation. The use of either will help us to establish the author's angle and perspective. Wrapping it all up, much to process here. Critical thinking skills help us navigate every aspect of our lives. As long as we're learning, we have the opportunity to refine and hone these skills. Refined and well thought out critical thinking skills have the benefit of making the world a more rational and reasonable place, and don't we all need that?